First item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone in the room or online from the public that want to comment?
I am not seeing anyone.
All right. Moving on, we're gonna start doing a roll call. Go back to our, reminding me of elementary school days. To just help us keep better track of the members that are present during the meetings. So Bruce Dickinson, here. Dave Bachman.
Yeah, I'm here.
I see him online.
Oh,
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Can you
Hello?
guys hear us online?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you not hear me?
We can't hear.
Feel like it did.
No.
It's something with our speaker because I can see that.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
I
can you say something, Dave?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Bueller.
It's your computer. Unmute your.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, there we
There
go.
it is.
Yay!
I can hear Dave on my end. I'm not sure why y'all
fixed
aren't
it.
able to hear him. Okay,
And Dina, I see you're here, so I'll check you out.
thank you.
Gina Briggs. Haley Purdy.
Here.
John Epstein. Melinda Bell's on vacation. Someplace even sunnier than here. Narendra Segal.
I'm here.
Nathan Teskey is going to be late. Nina Stafford.
Here.
Hello. And myself. All right. Is there, now it's time for any updates from the committee. Anyone want to share any news? Any updates? I actually have a couple I'd like to share. The first one, there is a change to the building code that is going to take effect May 1st. It's actually currently partially in effect, but you can now build 4 units under the residential code instead of 2. So this is a big cost savings, especially for better densification. So keep that in mind when
Is that a state code?
state change.
Great.
And we all saw the House bill for the zero interest construction loan, but that's middle income, and I don't think that really affects the housing authority much, but it has to be state or county backed. So if,
We're involved.
yeah, okay. And that's it. Anyone else? All right, so moving on, we have the executive director, Molly Rogers, to share the executive director report.
Trained. I have to admit, thinking about how to reflect on this past month has been a whirlwind challenge. It's like every day, there's new tumultuous bad news coming out of DC. So I just wanted to reflect upon that a little bit and go off script, if you will, from our report in the packet, and just say this really feels like unprecedented times. And then it feels like really lifetime now since the government administration's over. And HUD in particular, we think will be targeted.
Molly, possible to get you closer to the mic? We can barely hear you. Yeah.
It's this one. I don't know how it works. I can move down.
You can also hear.
I just looked at.
That's about as far as I'll go.
Thank you. That's much better.
Yeah. So about a month, a few weeks ago, as you all know, we got the initial executive order that placed a freeze on all grants and loans. Before that executive order even went into effect, we were locked out of our HUD system called ELOCs. We didn't have access to our HUD money. And we had to come together very quickly as one Washington County. We elevated that to our county CFO and CIO. And we were, of course, not the only departments affected. Everyone was locked out of their federal systems all in one within, before it even went into effect. So as you all know, that feels kind of like a long time ago now, but fast forward, we had to pull together, figure out, we were gonna be short about $3.2 million to be able to pay February rent. So I just want to say this team really mobilized together, really proud of Liz and other folks in the room. And our various folks in the finance team to understand, like literally cash in hand, how many rents can we pay? Do we have any backfill opportunities? What do we need to advance? Contingency plan A, B, and C. So we were able to work with HUD and find out on a daily basis, wondering when we were going to get access back. As you all know, there was a moratorium on that portion, the OMB portion of the executive order. We were able to get our funds dispersed to us. But it's just, I think it's a precursor, it's a canary in the coal mine moment of what we need to be planning for and potentially facing if our programs are frankly either terminated or eliminated or delayed in how we handle that situation. So to make what we've learned since then is every day it's sort of something new. We know that the Oregon field office is experiencing layoffs. We know that the community planning and development side of HUD is facing the more cuts right now. What's really hard is a lot of rumor milling, and everything's happening so fast. It's happening faster than we can keep up with news reports and any official notices. So that's been a little bit delayed. So what I'm sharing with you is we're trying to glean from what I'm hearing directly from Brian Geeney, who's our field area director at Oregon, and from news reports and from other credible sources like Margaret Salazar, who's the former Region 10 administrator. She's been keeping me up to date of what she's hearing from HUD. We know that there's layoffs happening at the field office as of this week. And we know they are officially telling us that our HUD technical assistance resources have been are being eliminated for related to homelessness work. The big date ahead of us that will be another signal of where this is all heading is March 15th. That's when Congress is supposed to either pass a budget or have it appropriate the funds, or we have a shutdown. I think luckily we've actually Aaron Doyle here, who's our government relations manager. I didn't necessarily, sorry, Aaron, putting you on the spot if there's anything you wanted to share on things you may be hearing at the federal level.
Every day is a blessing in chaos, if that's what you enjoy. Speaker, I know I'm loud, but at the federal level right now, there's just a lot of every day, new announcements, less clarity, another lawsuit, a pause, a question as to whether or not the administration will put forward their pause. I am still working through the 2 budget documents that were put together by the House and Senate with some of my colleagues in this room doing the start, but Melissa. So what the House and Senate are working on are setting up budget cuts across most of the service departments that for the next year's budget, because why finish this year's budget? It's only halfway through the budget year. So it's just a lot. Every day has new executive orders, new decision-making at HUD, and none of it seems to be in support of the work that HUD was supposed to do. And I'm sorry, that was my personal opinion, not the official stance of the county. So we're just trying to keep track, but really there are 2 pieces that I'm paying most attention to, and they are this year's fiscal year 25 budget and next year's fiscal year 26 budget, because that is where the legislature will try to enforce that if they appropriate it, the administration spends it. And that has been the biggest consternation And they are going to probably reduce appropriations, and the courts are going to be asked to hold the administration responsible. But enforcement is a challenge and will remain a challenge. So I am not cheerful, lighthearted when it comes to the federal government at this point in time. Every day is grinding.
So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, because of course, what does that mean for us?
Yeah.
A lot of unknowns. But I just wanted to share with you, we're doing some work internally to organize ourselves. One thing that we have already done, Melissa Sensala has led the work to create an inventory of all of our federal resources that we have here, but also it's combined with the whole county. So with One Washington County, we're at least trying to track every single federal resource that is coming our way. And what we've done is we've cross-tabbed that with our stated goals related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and climate change tied to the initial executive orders. And what we are going to continue doing is have an internal huddle, start creating a little task force internally, and look at scenario planning and what happens if everything from worst case scenario to what's really in the realm of possibilities, to understand, if X program is affected, what are our options? So we can start thinking about possibilities and options at our fingertips. Not to say that we have no idea how this will all play out. These are things that we will wait and see, because we don't want to be too reactive. But we want to do that sort of additional planning work. And did you have a question on that?
Yeah, I didn't want to interrupt. Just when you say resources, that's top line revenue coming from HUD.
And we're have an inventory across all of the
Of
county
income
departments.
streams.
Yeah.
Got it.
But we have one particular that Melissa's collated just for our department. We also have an Office of Community Development here in the county. They're the ones who get Community Development Block Grant, Home, and the Emergency Shelter Grants. Those are the ones we believe could be most effective. So we're having those scenario planning conversations that includes the Office of Community Development, so that we know, because they're doing housing work just like we are. We want to embed this scenario planning with them. If there are things we can.
And then just a quick follow-up, the 3.2 million shortfall, what did that disrupt? Did it disrupt vouchers to individuals? When you said you had $3.2 million?
We did for a 4-day period, and then HUD released the funds.
But that's where it flows ultimately.
So just for clarification, we get a monthly disbursement for HUD for us to pay our housing choice voucher and other special purpose vouchers monthly. So we are
Yes.
vulnerable.
Sure.
And the order came down the week before our rents were meant to be paid. So we did have about a 4 or 5 day uncertainty where we were trying to figure out what other funds we could pull from in order to make.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out what individuals were impacted by the.
Yeah, no, it was mostly our housing choice voucher and our special purpose voucher, like BASH and folks.
Okay.
We do have a lot of ARLA, which is our SHS funded rent assistance program. That was safe because we have the funds for SHS. So we had to do our rents in a bifurcated way.
Got it.
Folks backed by ARLA, because we knew the funds were in the bank,
Right.
and then HUD
Got it.
funded.
Thank you.
participants.
Sorry for the interruption.
No,
Just
no,
wanted to
it's-
make sure.
These are the things we're trying to now all line up. It's kind of wild times. I just wanted to also let you all know, we did submit our requested budget for fiscal year 25-26 just in the last 2 weeks as well. In the midst of this uncertainty, it's been a little bit crazy times to think about various changes to all that. And I just wanted to be clear that that budget that we submit is related to our county related funds. So not our housing authority budget yet. And that's the budget that will come to you for you all for your review over the next few months.
That's June to June, right?
It's July.
July to July.
July, June.
Yeah.
July, June. So both Hawk is on the July, June, our county, other budget as a Department of Housing Services is also July, June, but it but the one thing that is a note for you all is all of our staffing, including our housing authority staffing, is included in our county budget request. So that's why we do, we have to think a little bit about our housing authority side, of course, when we do that initial budget. And I just wanted to give you all, oops, that's Nathan, if you wouldn't mind looking in. Hey Nathan, welcome. Doing some kvetching and venting, no, kvetching. I just wanted to give you guys a quick highlight of all this. Mersada will come and tell a little more, but just to highlight, we did submit a request budget of $158 million, which is a bit less, about 18 million less than our current fiscal year. Mainly because of the reduced forecast we're facing on our supportive housing services measure. And that is 158 million covers all of our homeless programs. It's our Metro Affordable Housing Bond, and it's all of our staffing, our department. We are looking at moving our homeless programs, moving from growth to more stability and right sizing. And we're looking at kind of holding steady on our housing authority and housing programs until we know more information on the federal side. More to come when we do the HOC budget with you all. We are embedding some elimination of vacant positions as part of our budget request. We added some additional positions over the course of a year because we brought in our employees like BNF, officially under BNF was a dotted line with our Office of Equity and Inclusion, is now part of housing, also our communication staff. So we're thrilled to have the inclusion of those additional staff, but overall, you add that, we are essentially eliminating 11 vacant positions. That's what we're facing today and more to come. We know that there's going to be headwinds ahead of us around a potential reform package on supportive housing services. And of course, not knowing, of course, housing remains very expensive still to build. Great to hear about the fourplexes, Ryan. And yet what's really, I just want to also say, in the middle of all this chaos, we continue to be an exceptional performer for HUD. And I'm so thrilled to let you all know that we were informed to get here. We are receiving 50 additional VASH vouchers this year.
Really?
Last year we got 25. We were the only housing authority in Oregon to get the 25 last year. And this year, because we keep performing, we're getting now another 50. So thank you to Liz and the red team. And wildly enough, just Friday, we found out we are getting our tenant protection vouchers from HUD for our Section 18 disposition of our 60 public housing units. So I think there's movement happening in HUD where people are trying to get the funds out that we've applied for before appropriations gets into a deadlock issue. So that was a little bit unexpected, but that was wonderful to know that those residents will be fully protected and supported as they move into their next housing journey. Whew. Last, I just want to take a moment to share with you our very own Melissa Sensala is moving on from Washington County and got fabulous, huge, not huge. It's not huge, but it's a perfect place for Melissa, Deputy Director of the Clackamas County Housing.
Look at you. Don't be here.
So it's a perfect fit. I just want, Melissa began her time here with us for about August 2021.
Yep.
And has really led the team that has helped us establish and refine our department policies, build our data sharing and communication strategies, increase our engagement with committees such as this one. Also really deeply committed to our residents and participants and our staff. And she's telling the stories of our department successes and improving all of our processes and practices. And we are much better off because of Melissa.
I also just wanted to spend a moment and say she was really instrumental in helping create our employee-led team called the Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Council, also known as DIBS. And really laid the groundwork and foundation of our DEI here across the whole department, making sure everyone had access to equity trainings many years in a row. You have really helped DIBS accomplish an incredible slate. Just a few examples in the last year. You guys spent a lot of time. It's really hard. This is actually really hard to do. This is no small feat, but creating a whole new equity statement that everyone can feel good about is huge. And that was part of our strategic framework effort. Also, you guys organized the Fair Housing Bus Tour. If you all haven't done it, highly recommend. I think it happens a couple times throughout the year.
They do it all year long, but we take part in it probably once a year, so it is really remarkable. Yeah, it's a good one.
It's very humbling, you'll cry. Also, making sure we get as many people to the Northwest Diversity Conference for public employees. We've created like a multimedia hours facilitation, getting people more connected. We've had lots of successful council recruitments, more to come for that front. And then, of course, lots of external training and support mentoring for folks where they are on their equity journey through Red Sea Road and the Center of Equity and Inclusion. And you have been a steadfast facilitator organizer of this group in particular, Melissa. So I just wanted to open up the floor and see if anyone else wanted to say anything.
You don't have to, no one has to. say anything. I'm not dying, I'm just moving cautious. You can find me there.
Good luck.
Thank you.
We will get to benefit for years to come. We wish you well, Melissa. So with that, I'm happy to open up to any questions.
Is there, can the hack, are we at a quorum now where we can vote on?
I think we are informed, yeah.
Can we issue like a letter of support? I know Senator Wyden is looking for very specific items that like want specifics that they can go and say, this is what is happening on the ground. Can we put together a letter of support and send that out? Can we work with you to get examples and who to send it to? And also with
Yes.
Metro? as well?
Yes, what's, trying to think who could be a good lead on that, maybe you, Deanna. I haven't, because we're in this, a lot of what's gonna happen in HUD is gonna eventually trickle down to us, but it hasn't quite yet.
Yeah.
But if there are projects that you know are in jeopardy, we know where, what's in question right now is the earmarks that our congressional delegation fought for. We don't know if those will come. So let's start working on a letter of great.
That's a good idea.
Do you know of other effects that you've heard about?
Like you said, it's just a whole bunch of noise out there to distract people and what's actually gonna, everyone's going crazy and no one knows what's gonna stick. But I do want to reach out to Northwest Housing Alternatives because I heard they actually got a big chunk of their funds cut. I don't know exactly what it was. For splitting.
From HUD?
I just heard it was a LinkedIn post saying they lost a bunch of funding, but they're proud of being in a community that they're sure that they're gonna find ways to keep going and succeed. So I wanna reach out to Trell and see what he got hit by.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That was kind of the basis of my question. You've made a decision and impacted these people. So I've been on the phone with some of my favorite House of Representatives people, super fun conversation.
Yeah.
But it's a good idea, grassroots, just say this is the actual impact. Yeah, it's a good idea.
I will say, we had so many phone calls that we had so much fear happening with our residents.
Of course.
But that's, yeah, let's think through, once we, and I also want to bring in, it's our homelessness side and the continuum of care that I think is also cool. So let's maybe think about a joint, either a joint letter or two separate letters, but thinking about both sides being it. Folks with our homelessness solutions councils who are capturing.
Yeah, and I know
All
we
sides.
have Erin sharing about some of the legislative work that's happening, so if there's any emphasis on some of the bills that are coming through, then maybe there's integration there somehow. Yeah.
Do you have a tracker of House bills that are,
For the state legislature?
yeah,
Yes, we
Yeah.
do. Most of-
Right back there. We do have a tracker for House bills. Our government relations team tracks the rest. There are a lot, there are
We're
a handful
trying.
this year,
There's
handful
a
this year.
lot.
yeah, yeah, of
And then
course.
they filter them through to the correct people across the departments who need to review and sort of analyze for impacts. So bills that impact housing and homeless services tend to come to 3 or 4 of us at least in housing for us to review and sort of look through and pick out how it impacts federal programs, how it impacts, ordinances that we've already passed, things like that. But yeah, we are tracking them. And then we also belong to a couple of different organizations that are constantly sharing what our priorities are, when things are going for public hearing, when we need to submit testimony, that sort of thing. So we're getting those emails constantly too.
Great.
Yeah.
I think we'll learn, we'll hear more with our legislative update too, but yeah, a lot of bills.
Yeah.
Hopefully a lot more funding. Any other questions for me? Is this, I just wanted, actually had a question for you all. Is this, oh, was someone speaking online?
I think Jill was muted for a bit.
Is it helpful to have these periodic updates? I'm just thinking it would be something we could start continue to do.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great.
Probably the world we'll live in, so yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? So moving on to resolution and action items, there aren't any right now. So move on to the staff liaison update.
That's me. Okay. Well, first I just want to acknowledge that we do have 2 admin folks here, Mary and Nikki. They're helping us right now with transitions. There's just been a lot of transitions happening also since Jacob has left, but thank you so much for helping me hack admin stuff. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I just want to remind folks that in accordance with meeting law ORS 192.650, our recordings will be available as meeting minutes, so just keep that in mind. Our recordings are on our iAgenda page. So I sent the last one to y'all, so you'll be receiving those. We are hoping to host our annual public meeting law records and ethics trainings. Fun stuff, Jacqueline. We did that last year for new members. And it's going to be open to current members as well, and also our Homeless Solutions Advisory Council. So if you want to keep up to date with records and ethics, we will be doing that in April. We'll make it fun, right? So thanks, we're planning that right now. More information will be sent out. I have, as your committee liaison, been meeting with our co-chairs, Ryan and Melinda. We're starting to meet on a monthly basis just to make sure that we're kind of on the same page with the work that we're doing, moving it forward. And also we're doing the bylaw revision process, which we're going to start very soon. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. And also we have 2 big events coming up. We have the opening of our Ultra Affordable Housing, which is happening in Beaverton. That's happening in March 13th, 3:30 to 4:30. And I'll make sure to send out this information to you all, which is exciting. 75 units of mixed 1, 2, and 3 bedroom. I was actually working on this when I was at the city of Beaverton, so that's exciting that it's actually coming into fruition.
Yeah, sorry, how many units?
75 units, yeah. And then we have Plambeck Gardens grand opening in Tualatin, April 3rd. And those are 116 units, so that's 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom, which is exciting. We're having some grand opening, so we'll share that information if you can attend, that's great. And then moving on to some recruitment updates. Our interviews are over. Thanks to Ryan and Melinda for being part of that process. It's really helpful to hear some of the feedback and thoughts about some of the recruits. Our next steps are to recommend 5 members to join HAC, because we will have 5 open slots. And they will begin in April. So the next step is we'll send those recommendations to Molly and Jill, and then they will then present to the Board of County Commissioners in our March 18th meeting, with final approval April 1st. So yeah, we'll have new members in April, so that's exciting. Have some,
Really cool.
yeah.
They're doing great interviews.
Lots of people with different experiences, and I think we'll have a lot to share within the space, so excited about that. And then just some information about our listening sessions report. This was last summer where we had our listening sessions, thanks to all of those who were able to join that. This was 2 sessions, one focused on service providers and another on the general public. There were so much insights and stories that were really helpful in understanding the successes and challenges. That is in your packet, and you should have gotten a link to that. So if you want to look at that, it's a very summarized version of our findings. So please feel free to look at that, and if you have any questions, please be available. But yeah, there's a lot of updates. If anyone has questions or thoughts.
So now we are moving on to the ongoing business.
Yep, that's me again.
Yep.
You're gonna hear from me for the next 2 topics. Okay, so we are kicking off our bylaw revision process. So our next debrief with Ryan and Melinda, we're gonna be reviewing Articles 1 and 2. The easiest part of the bylaws, which is the name and purpose. If you're interested in any particular section of the bylaws, please reach out to me so I can loop you in. So we're just kind of doing this a little small committee of the chairs and I to make sure that we're moving that work along, so.
Really exciting if anyone wants to help.
Just like.
We appreciate your.
Hey, Ryan.
Yeah. Doing the fun stuff over here. Okay, and then I can move us along for the look ahead conversation, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes.
Vice Chair. Okay, so I'm just referring back to the conversation that y'all had last meeting, so I'm gonna share my screen real quick. Okay, so thanks for Melissa for putting this slide together, just to kind of ground us in some of the work that we're doing. So as you can see here, the Housing Advisory Committee does a lot. I mean, there's just, a lot that we're kind of tracking of. Obviously, we're going through.
Jill,
our-
you're off mute.
Oh.
I don't know if you're trying to be, oh, there you go.
Oh, okay. We are going through our bylaw revision process. They haven't been updated since 2017, so it's very much about time. We are also adhering to some of our reports and plans. Obviously, those are plans that we have with on the housing authority side. So those are some of the things that we're keeping track of. Financial information, obviously having quarterly reports, approving and making sure that our budget is looking good for each fiscal year. Obviously, we have local measures or state legislative updates. And then obviously new initiatives that are coming up, obviously, with some of the Fed stuff that's happening, that's definitely something we have to keep our eyes on. The strategies that we're doing, real estate, public housing. And I also wanted to share some of the thoughts that were also collected during the last meeting. So there was an interest around long-term planning, which is great. Also thinking about economic impact when it comes to real estate strategy. Obviously understanding economic context within development and housing, an update on Heartwood, that was an ask, which we can definitely do. And also bringing questions, to HAC members on what is it that they're looking for, like, why are we sharing this information? What is needed from HAC and what's next? So all heard, all being integrated. And the hope is that we will bring, each year we'll have this conversation where we're kind of grounding ourselves, or what is 2025 gonna look like, 2026? So this is helpful for us. But if there's anything else that people wanna share, highlight, something that we may be missing, that is something that of interest of this group, I wanted to open it up again. But also just happy to move along with this work and take it forward. So just wanted last minute thoughts on that.
Everyone?
Great,
Thank you.
yeah. I did my job well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So now, well, Erin Doyle's already been introduced, the Senior Government Relations Manager. Is gonna give us legislation update. So while the,
Try to find the right speaker.
yeah.
Like, come sit on this side.
Never known you'd have to get close to a speaker.
While Erin's presenting.
Yeah.
Some items to think about for the HAC committee to think about, you know, what do we see as a high priority legislation for the housing authority? And also what information might we need to better understand that legislation and how we can assist?
Yes, and as I was making notes this morning on my PowerPoint presentation, I noticed a few fun errors I made, so this is gonna be even better. I'll get an updated version. Yeah. So for those that missed it, because I just started talking, good morning, everyone. My name is Erin Doyle. I use her pronouns, slow down. I'm the Senior Government Relations Manager, and I would normally not be here to do this update. My colleague Carly Sylvia Gabrielson is unfortunately unavailable today, so you get me. So if you ask me detailed questions, I will get back to you. I spend more of my time doing federal work and managing my team, but for Washington County, there are 3 government relations managers that I manage as part of the team. They work specifically with departments. Carly normally works with HHS at the state level. So I'm filling in for her for a little bit, so I will do my best to make you all proud and help hopefully understand things. Next slide is blank, or maybe we took that blank slide out. Yeah, that would be an error. I meant to put an agenda in and I forgot. So we'll go to the slide after this. So I wanted to do 2 things today. First, ground you all in the state budget process, because that is the fun thing that happens in a long session. Just so you know, and then talk about what's in the governor's recommended budget and then what that looks like at the state legislative level. And then I'll talk a little bit about a few specific bills that I pulled out that I thought might be of interest. But I'll give you more details on the fact that that was not sufficient. But let me start with the state budget process. So for those that don't know, Oregon as a state runs on a biennial budget process. So that's 2-year budget. And they do it in what are the odd year sessions called the long sessions. They are long so that they have time to do the budget. Budget years begin on July 1st of the odd year, so 2025. So July 1st, 2025, the state is supposed to have a brand new 2-year budget. But that budget can be amended in that short session or by special session, which is done at the call of the legislature and the governor and is usually limited to very specific things. An example of that is this year, or last year, I guess it's 2025 now. In 2024, they did a special session to enhance the amount of funding available to respond to the wildfires that had happened. So that was a budget process that needed to occur because they didn't have enough money. So there are 3 steps to the process. First, the agencies across the state put together their requested budgets. They are given parameters by the governor, something along the lines of, don't get too carried away. But really, like, what is your continuing service levels? Oftentimes there's a, what's your reduction? What's your, if you wanted to get extra, what are called policy option packages or POPs? What are those? Put those materials together, send them into the governor's office. The governor's office then collects those agency requests and creates what's called the governor's recommended budget, which comes out at the beginning of the year. So if there's time for reaction to it, that combines all of those agency requests, puts it through the lens of the governor's priority list and realistic, hopefully, assessments of what the revenue picture kind of is going to look like. And then the governor publicizes that recommended budget. That then locks in what the agencies are allowed to do with the legislature. They can only advocate to the extent they are given permission by the governor's office. So once the governor recommends their budget, I'm just going to use Oregon Housing and Community Services, or OHCS, as the example throughout today, because they're the ones most prevalent in this world. So once the governor makes a recommendation of OHCS's budget, that is what OHCS lobbies to. They can't go beyond that without express permission from the governor's office. Because once the governor's recommended budget comes out, it gets handed to the legislature and the legislature says, that's adorable. We're gonna do what we want. They don't really, they try to be respectful of the fact that there are, you know, multiple branches of government. There are some exceptions to that, but they're not relevant in the housing space. So next slide. I pulled together, well, I didn't pull together. I have had these slides for a couple of presentations just to give you a flavor of what last year's budget looks like and how those funds go out into the state. So last year was a cuts budget for the state over the 21-23 approved budget, but you can see the vast, so yeah, it's we're currently in the budget cycle of 23-25. We're going into 25-27. You can see the vast majority is under this umbrella called human services, which is where the housing budgets are included. They kind of divide them up over some very specific titles, but multiple agencies are included within that piece of the pie. So you can see, and I'll just throw this out there because I also work on land use and transportation and have for quite some time. The natural resources budget is less than 3% of the overall state budget, but it includes like 20 some agencies for the state. So yeah, our money is in human services as a state. And then the school takes up, there's 2 pie pieces, and then all other is bigger than the natural resources budget. So just fun facts about the state's budget. Next slide. But where does our money come from? 4 real sources. The general fund, which is what our income taxes create, essentially. There's other fees and other things that come in that are considered general fund. And then there's lottery funds. So if you play the lottery, you're helping support a bunch of stuff. Other funds is the things they can't categorize except federal funds. And so you can see that federal funds and other funds are the vast majority of the budget. Those other funds, just as, because it's a catch-all, they're gonna catch it all. The general fund and the lottery funds are the most flexible for purpose of expenditure. And federal funds are usually just passed through into specific programming. They are not as flexible. It's not like the Fed just is like, here, Oregon, have some money, spend it how you want. They're like, here, Oregon, pay for Medicaid under these rules and guidelines. Or here, Oregon, you have some funding you can do for transportation that has to be spent in the following manner, and ODOT gets to have some discretion in that. So those are the types of things that happen with federal funds. That is why the federal budget conversation is such a big deal this year, because the big thing that the state is paying attention to is those dollars for Medicaid, which are a huge chunk of that almost $38 billion in the Oregon state budget. And it is a commitment to serve those most vulnerable. And the legislature has said they want to maintain that commitment. But you can see that that is a huge chunk of the pie. So if they are trying to if we lost all $38 billion of federal funding, that's 31% of last year's budget. There is no way to backfill that. It is a big deal. And I'm starting to shake with rage, so I'm gonna calm down for a second. Realistically, it cannot all be backfilled, and therefore the legislature will have to be making some decisions. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But we'll go to the next slide so I can calm down. The state general fund, as I said, comes from income taxes and business taxes. It is the most flexible, the most discretionary set of funds that the state legislature works with. It's mostly there to pay for agencies that cannot produce its own revenues through like fee permits or things like, OLCC, they can charge a liquor tax and therefore, and all the other taxes that pay for their work. The Oregon DEQ has a bunch of permitting fees. So, those types of things come into the other fees the other funds bucket. So general funds covers those that do not have. So there's a lot of technical assistance that comes with that. A lot of maintenance and operations for state agencies. And sometimes there's a small bucket of it available to be like, can I have some from everyone in the state? And that is highly competitive. Next slide. The other big area of flexibility is the lottery funds, and this is usually used for bonding against, so we can build projects across the state. This is also where we're like, hey, can I have more of that? So Washington County does have some requests out there, but the other challenge with lottery funds is that every time somebody thinks, you know what should be done in Oregon, let's just dedicate a piece of the lottery funds to it. So they set aside a percentage that has to go to specific things. And sometimes you just write things that justify saying this is an economic development project, or this is a K-12 education project. So you should just earmark it for me in what we call the Christmas tree bill. Everybody gets a gift. But that's all bonded against and therefore can be used to really do some really great projects across the state. These are also highly competitive dollars for every lobbyist in the building, including Washington County. But this is the biggest set of discretion that the legislature uses in creating their budget. So next slide. This slide is hard to read when you're this far away from it. And also when you're really close to it, because I don't have my reading glasses on. But at the top of that graph, you can see, so these pie charts came from the governor's recommended budget. Thank you. The governor has noted there's approximately $255 billion in expected resources to be expended. Again, looking at what they have put in, they've significantly reduced the expected resources from the federal government down to 16% of the expected resources. So at least we're working in a realistic sense. Other funds and federal funds beginning balance. So the carry forward that they will be taking from last year's budget that they haven't spent, which doesn't have to go back out in a kicker. We can talk about that later, but again, I get irritated fast. That's 45% of the budget. So it's reserve funding. It is not going forward funding. So they will have it for this biennium, but wouldn't necessarily want to stand up programs if they are budgeting like Washington County does, where we spend one-time funds on one-time things, not programming. So general fund is only 15% and lottery bonds is significantly smaller because they often don't know exactly what the lottery revenue is going to look like. If you go down, the expenditures is expected to be $137.7 billion. And this is how it breaks down. Again, human resources is the vast majority of that pie. But you can see on the other side of this slide, now that I'm not zoomed in, I can read it, of how that shakes out for purposes of housing in particular. So Oregon Housing and Community Services is the agency that's most in touch with housing. There are other agencies that have impacts on how housing is developed, like Business Oregon, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, the new housing, HAPO.
Housing accountability.
Yep, that one, Housing Accountability and Production Office. I just like to call it the Housing Police, so sorry about that. They are, and then some things in the Department of Consumer and Businesses Services, which has the construction oversight, the code, all of that. And so there are people that touch on it, but I wanted to concentrate on OHCS because one of the governor's big priorities remains housing and homelessness and addressing that and moving people from unsheltered into long-term permanent shelter. She did put more money into OHCS's budget, approximately, according to their, so all of these numbers come out of the governor's recommended budget. I did not do math. So some of these numbers overlap, just to be really clear, but OHCS's budget has a 12% increase. In particular, they call out the continuation of the ongoing homelessness emergency response. So the executive orders that the governor has done, their homeownership programs and ongoing overall costs for OHCS at $771.7 million. LIFT and PS, so LIFT, I'm not gonna get that acronym because I don't do that anymore.
Local Innovation Fast Track.
Yep, which is a big bonding program for housing development and PSH, permanent supports, yeah. Permanent supportive housing. The governor's budget calls for general obligation bonds, which are basically bonding against the general fund, not lottery dollars, at 880 million. LIFT is always a big chunk of bonding opportunities that then get divvied out across the state. And then kind of a new thing, I think, is an actual call out and attention to housing and manufactured housing park preservation. So affordable housing preservation and manufactured housing park preservation, using lottery bonds this time, again, very competitive at $185 million. So another way to break some of those dollars down is in what the governor put out as their new building investment targets is 880 million. That's that LIFT and PSH. But then an additional set of money that's not going into OHCS is the new housing infrastructure program, which I'll talk about a little bit later. They set aside $100 million for that. And then in addressing homelessness, pulled out some specific numbers there, the statewide shelter maintenance, so not new shelters, this is maintaining the stock of shelter beds that we have at 217.9 million, and then transitional housing efforts, so moving people from those shelter beds into permanent supportive housing along that continuum of service is $188.2 million. So those are some pretty big numbers and very exciting to see that commitment, but again, the governor says, this is my recommendation, and the legislature says, neat, thanks, moving on. So we'll go to the next slide.
Are those based on like the actual, like the shelter maintenance fund? Is that based on the actual need to maintain the existing?
It is their estimation of their need at continuing service levels. So continuing service levels is a phrase that we use a lot in the state budget process. It's basically what does it take in next year's dollars to maintain the services that we have currently. So that's estimated based on what they are currently doing. So I forgot that I didn't add another slide on the state process. So that's the end of the budget conversation. I would like to pause myself for your sake and see if anybody has any specific questions that I can punch to later.
So thanks. I got just slightly confused on the 121 billion, slide that you had before.
Mhm.
B, that's an expense side. Yes?
I'm sorry, I need to
So
go
it's
back.
the kind of your first big pie chart. 121 billion, there it is.
Yep, that's the
Those are-
expenditures,
Those are expenditures.
correct.
And the federal,
Federal's in the next chart,
okay,
which
thank
is the
you.
revenue source.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have a pretty pie chart like this that shows you what the breakdown is of just the human services component?
I don't, because I make the state make these charts and they make what they feel like making.
Do you think that it would be a similar pie?
I would imagine actually the portion of federal funds that go into that is higher just because of all of the pass-through funds that come through, like, so Health and Human Services,
Mhm.
OHCS. And I can't remember all the other human services departments. There's a number of them that are they are direct recipients from the federal government and pass through benefit to individual Oregonians. So that's my best guess.
So is it fair to say then in the last pie chart we saw from you, then because you're saying the federal funds is a bigger part of the pie? Yeah, and that one.
Go to slide 8.
Next one.
You're right.
Keep going.
Keep going.
This
Is
way.
it fair to say then, though, because Human Services has historically had more federal funds in that pie chart, and now that it's got down to 16%, you've got a significant shortfall?
I would imagine that they're going to have very explicit conversations about what that shortfall is. I also think this is what the governor did in December and January, before a lot of choices and
Oh.
actions had been taken. Sorry, I should have been clearer about the timeline for
That's
that. So this was the governor being conservative about what federal funds they were expecting,
Based on the world.
based on knowing who was coming into the administration and the commitments they had made at the, on the campaign trail. I think that this budget conversation is very much ongoing and is going to be, it's going to put everything else on pause until we kind of have a better sense of the direction the legislature at the federal level is headed, as far as getting dollars back into their communities. So realistically, these pie charts are gonna change significantly, as we know more, but by having more of it being the carry forward of federal funds as opposed to an expectation of new federal funds. And I mean, like, obviously, these two pie charts that we were just comparing of the resources and revenues
Yeah.
have different categorizations, so it's not an apples to apples. So how the state legislature budget document calls those revenue sources out versus how the governor's recommended budget, there's an additional slice that's differently named, so.
And Aaron, I always ask run-on questions.
That's fine.
So my run-on question was, in my notes, then of the 121 billion expense side,
Mhm.
is the federal piece 30-ish% or 16% as a revenue source?
It's 31%
Okay, thank
of
you.
last year's
I confused
budget.
myself.
No, I gave you a lot of pie charts.
No, that's fine. And I get the breakdown and the total's
Yeah.
the total and it might break down differently.
Yeah.
But it's about 31% that if I should be concerned about.
So yeah, 31% of the last fiscal biennium's budget was
Thank you.
federal funds of those
And
122.
And the governor's recommended budget brought that down to that 31 down to 16.
Mhm.
That's where that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I was just trying to waterfall it properly. Thank
Yeah, no, that's great. It makes me think about the budget harder, which is never good for anyone.
do you have a typo real quickly on the million versus billion when it comes to resources and expenditures? It says on the above those pie charts that it's million.
Oh, it's because there's a comma there, so it's $255 billion,
Billion,
but
got it.
it's 255
Thank
thousand million. So I was just like, I'm just gonna move the decimal point because it's my brain, it's my brain. Welcome to my brain.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And it
All right,
might be
thank
for
you.
Molly. That you mentioned the conversations happening around Medicaid cuts.
Mhm.
Very disturbing, but I know the county had applied to become a hub for this Medicaid waiver. And my organization also got a little funding for that, and we're trying to sort of. Is there any update on that? I know it's a little in the weeds, but is the county still proceeding on the assumption that funding will be available to use the Medicaid dollars for housing?
We are proceeding until we know otherwise.
Yeah, okay.
But it's just capacity building. We got the initial
Yeah.
round for capacity building,
Yeah.
so they're building out the capacity.
Right.
With the hopes, because that portion went live back in November in terms of the
Right,
rent
right.
assistance
So
portion,
you're not planning, you're not at this point, you're just proceeding as
as far as we know.
as far as you know. Got it. Okay, thanks.
That's part of our scenario planning. Thank you for adding
Scenario.
that to the list.
Okay, so now we know what the governor did, so I wanted to switch into what the legislature may be doing. This slide is also out of date, so I had to look up new numbers because some things happened in the meantime, and now I've lost my PowerPoint. So, long session is 160 days constitutionally. They can extend if they don't get all their business done, but they start in January in hopes that the budget will be done before July 1st. It's fun and we like it that way, as opposed to doing continuing resolutions because we're not the federal government. So the only thing that is required of the state legislature to do is pass a budget. Don't tell them that. They don't know that. Apparently, they like to do a lot of other things. So this is the numbers that are out of date. When I originally put this slide together, which was a couple of weeks ago, there were over 27, oh, and I didn't even delete that extra zero right there. It's 2,700 or 2,700 bills were introduced a couple of weeks ago. I checked this morning, there's over 3,300 bills now. And that is the first deadline passed at the end of business yesterday, which is the no more new bills, with exceptions, can be introduced at this point in time. That's kind of a new deadline, and therefore it's a very soft thing. Leadership always gives themselves permission to create new bills. The other thing that those over 3,000 bills represent is a lot of what we call placeholders. So the way state legislation works is they are required for every bill to have what's called a relating to clause, which limits the scope of what the bill can be. That relating to clause can be as tight as relating to property disposition in Clackamas County for housing purposes, or can be as broad as relating to housing. So we have a lot of placeholder bills that are related to housing. And those just basically are there to be what we call gut and stuffed. So remove the placeholder language, put in the actual policy. So that 4,000 estimation is unlikely to be hit, so thank the Lord. But it is still a really high number of a lot of ideas, some with more merit than others. In looking through those over 3,300 bills, if you just search for the word housing, there are 330 bills that come back. If you just search homelessness, you get 40. There's probably some overlap between those two. So there's a lot of bills that we have to track. A lot of them are related to housing, so we'll figure it out. What the legislature did say at the beginning is they wanted to focus on four things. And there's one thing that I leave off of this every once in a while because I also forget, but the number one thing is budgeting, given what the federal government is going to do, and that is going to be their key focus. They still want to put emphasis on housing and homelessness, substance use disorder treatment and funding for that, and the education budget and getting that sorted out. The thing that's not on here, because right now ODOT did some stuff, is the transportation package is also still on the list, maybe, unless their oversight becomes a little bit more heavy-handed. You can read papers for that. I'm not gonna talk about it. The other thing that's really important to note in the 2025 session is what's called the supermajority. So there are constitutional requirements for votes related to things that raise revenue. So if you increase a gas tax, for example, that is considered revenue raising, and you have to have 2/3 of each chamber support it. A supermajority is 2/3. So both the Senate and House Democrats have what is a supermajority, exactly a supermajority. So if they want to do revenue raising votes, which will cost folks in Oregon, they can do it on a party-wide vote. It is never worked that way. I've yet to see a party-wide agreement that 2/3 for revenue raising that didn't either have to become bipartisan or get shelved. So next slide. Just to give you, you don't have to read these dates, but this is this legislative schedule. So this is the first 4 months. We're in February. Yesterday was the revenue forecast that had some generally positive news that I'll talk about in a moment. But so the big first deadline is that March, I can totally read numbers, 21st, they have to do what's called first chamber posting. So bills are introduced, they get assigned to a committee depending upon which chamber they're in. So if it's a Senate bill, goes to a Senate committee, if it's a House bill, goes to a House committee. There are a few joint committees. So the committee has to hold a public hearing and then a work session. A work session is where the part where the legislator works and makes a vote. So on the 21st, they have to do what's called posting the work session in order for the bill to move forward at all. That's the last date at which they can do the posting of the work session. If a bill is not scheduled for a work session and it is in one of the single chamber committees, so a House committee or a Senate committee, the bill can't move forward. If it is posted for work session, it stays alive until it gets moved out or hits the next deadline. If it's in a joint committee or very specific single chamber committees, these deadlines don't apply. So for substance use disorder, there is a joint committee. So those bills can spend more time being worked on. So the committee has their process. They do a public hearing and then they do a work session. If it passes out of the committee on work session, it then goes to that chamber's floor and then gets sent over to the other chamber for its vote. There are also a lot of other steps that could be taken, but I'm just gonna stick to those that are simple. So the April 9th is the first date by which they have had the work session on the bill so that they can get it over to the other chamber with enough time for them to continue working on things. Throughout this process, the bills can be amended. So it goes to the House committee as Senate bill, or it goes to the Senate committee as Senate Bill 31, because that makes more sense. And they make an amendment. It then becomes Senate Bill 31A. Goes to the floor. It is technically possible, but I've never seen it done, that they could amend on the floor. And then it would become Senate Bill 31B. And then it goes over the House, and then the House can make changes. So depending upon what amendment we're on now, it's Senate Bill 31C. And then they vote on it on the House floor. And if the version that passed the Senate and the version that passed the House are different, they have to do a conference, or the originating chamber has to say, no, we're good with their changes, and just do a approval vote. So April 9th is the day that many lobbyists do quiet dances of joy, because it means we've reduced the bills usually by like 2/3 by hitting that deadline. So next slide. And then the process gets a lot faster because they only have May and June to finish. So they have set themselves up for a target sine die date, and sine die means session's done. There's like no next day is essentially what sine die means. That's their target is June 18th. They like to target the day before a holiday, so it encourages everyone to work really fast. But constitutionally, they have until June 29th. 160 days includes weekends. Haha, so they can work on weekends. They used to start session in February, and they found that 160 days is right around 4th of July, and it got real testy in the chambers as a result. So they moved up the start date so that we end before the end of the fiscal year. So the other thing that's important on this is that orange box on May 14th, that is the final revenue forecast. So the state economist comes in and says, this is how much money we think the state's gonna have for the next biennium. That May 14th date is usually the forecast they budget their high number off of. So that is the date when you know how much money the state is likely to be looking at to expend. So that's a very important date for us that want their money. And then, so all of these deadlines do not apply to a very specific set of committees. The number one is the Joint Ways and Means, and that is the committee that spends all the money. They're everybody's favorite, and they never have time for any of us. So they are incredibly important. That's an incredibly important date. And then you start to see department budgets pass, and then all the policies that also have financial impacts on the state also have to go down to Ways and Means and come out. And so that date really starts to see some things trickle. It is very rare that budget bills get passed out before May because they really want to know how much money they have. But occasionally, if it's like the highest priority, or like there's a federal investment program into semiconductors that they would really like to be able to take advantage of with matching funds, they might pass a budget bill earlier, but it's very rare. So that is the legislature in a nutshell. So next slide. Back to the state budget issues. So as I stated, yesterday was the first revenue forecast during the session, and everybody listened and they said, "Ooh, that's a nice one." They estimate maybe $350 million more than they had expected from the last revenue committee. That's good, but we don't know the federal impacts. And so the the revenue forecast is about our local revenues, what we're gonna collect here in the state, not at county level, but at the state level, to create that sense of what our general fund is and what our lottery fund is. It's not all the other funds, because those are like fees or, you know, those sorts of things that's not the job of the state economist. But as has been stated about 400 times by me today, it is really gonna be dependent upon what the federal government does. And so if I were to bet on my work, which I never do, I imagine that we will pass the budget at the end of June. And then we will probably have a special session once the feds decide what their budget is to figure out how we can make up for what we cannot do anymore. And it's gonna be hard, and they are going to be very conservative in this budgeting. Not because we enjoy having the kicker kick, but because we don't know how to make sure we have resources available to make up for any losses of the feds deciding to cut us off. The feds deciding to cut the state off is also still really up in the air. And talking with our federal lobby team for the county, because the housing authority doesn't have one, you're not allowed to lobby at the federal level. What the county has heard is that there are ways that have been contemplated and discussed about, and I'm gonna use some challenging thoughts here. The state of Oregon is what's considered a sanctuary state. So the way that there are limitations on cooperation with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, because of that and their perceived liberalness generally, there have been some bills that would directly say no money can go into the state of Oregon or any other sanctuary jurisdiction. Not Oregon specifically, just any sanctuary jurisdiction, which includes Oregon, many of our local jurisdictions as well. However, they need to either put it in what's called the federal reconciliation process, which is, oh, we're just tinkering with the budget. And that has it limits the amount of process problems that can be caused with the passage of that bill. That reconciliation process is hard enough. It's where you're going to see the vast majority of cuts. It's where like those state budget or the federal budget proposals that came out over the last 7 days, come through that reconciliation process. It's basically where we're going to cut all of the proposed funding so that we can pay for changes to tax policy. Or it has to go through general legislative process. If it has to go through general legislative process, it will not move forward because the Senate requires what's called a cloture vote, which requires 60 senators to agree to hearing the measure. And you cannot find 10 Democrats to agree to cut off sanctuary jurisdictions from federal funding. So all of that's still very much up in the air. I doubt it will be decided by June, but we have to have a budget in place at the state level. So with that happy note, let's talk policy. Focusing in a little bit more on what it is that I want money for. I talked to my board and they set a legislative agenda. We have a state and a federal one. Once this gets sent out, you can use that very awkward link to go to our to the state legislative agenda. The federal one's also available online. But the way that we decide what our agenda is there's 3 pieces to it. We have overall guiding principles that kind of are how the lens by which we put every bill through. So things like no unfunded mandates, which is really about making sure that we get funded for the mandates, not the other way around. Want to be really clear about that. We can't afford to do more with nothing or less. So that's an example of that. The other thing is give us the flexibility to implement locally because we know our community. We work with fine people like all of you to really set what needs to happen at the local level. So those are examples of guiding principles and they are applied across every policy. The legislative priorities are our top 5 things that we want to try and get done. And I'm going to focus on one in a little bit, but we have a number of them. And then we also have capital construction requests, which would go into that Christmas tree bill because we want a present. And then we have what are called service-specific guiding principles. Those are established with our subject matter experts within each department and then add a further lens that the board has said you can set policy positions based on these principles. They are not priorities. So the next slide is our housing priority. It's one of 5, as I stated, and so, but I didn't want to go through all 5 of them because, well, I talk enough as it is. But really, we are focused on the folks who are facing the end of affordability restrictions. So these expire because they're subject to 30-year contracts. We have a these numbers are a little bit off because when we set them, we've managed to save some properties. And so we just haven't updated the slide because lazy. Lobbyists were lazy. So we want to do 2 things really. And one is finding a state funding source, because we can't afford anything, to support the residents. We're focused on the residents. These are the people most impacted when affordability expires. And then also, if we can, we want to buy the buildings from those who would otherwise turn it into market rate and say, we'll take the property at a fair market value, and we will preserve it as affordable housing using all of the tools that Molly and her team can put into that.
Or work with partners like Vienna Star.
Exactly. That's part of your tool, with your partners. No, but this is basically making sure that we are not going to see a cliff of the number of available units for folks who need to be in protected affordable housing. And that map comes from OHCS. And is the properties that we're talking about in those 2 counts in that paragraph about the number of homes that are up there. But it's the next 10 years of trying to preserve these units and or rehouse these individuals is going to be expensive and hard. So that is what the board decided to prioritize in the housing world. Next slide. So some bill numbers, and this is where I found another error this morning. But first is the housing preservation package. This is what a number of groups have put together. So for example, so with Senate Bill 937, I'm not going to read my slides, but essentially that extends notice so that tenants have a longer time to figure out what their plans are as they are facing expiration of affordability, permanent restricted affordability. Senate Bill 31, if you look at it right now, is a placeholder, but it has an amendment that creates an opportunity for very specific groups of people, i.e. the housing authority, to apply so that we can pull down rent assistance for folks who would have to move from from regulated affordable housing and into new affordable housing. Is about 3 months. There's all kinds of
More of a
cycles.
transition fund.
It's exactly
not actual, exactly.
Yeah, it's to help folks who have to move out. Like, this is not a fund by which we can preserve the building. It's a fund by which we can help people move from one situation to the next. And then Senate Bill 32 is about transparency, creating a better website than what we have that I took a picture of. But also will then tell a better story about where we're seeing publicly supported housing expire and provide folks with a clearer knowledge of when those contracts expire. So if I'm a resident in a place that I know that there's a contract for, I have a better idea of when I might be facing a potential change in circumstances. I will say that Washington County is very excited to be supportive of all of these. So we will be, those bills are up on Monday, the 3rd. Our chair will be testifying because it's a big deal for us. So on this package of bills that we like, just because I can't help myself is sometimes I think about land use and housing together. So I just named a couple of bills here, and then I'll say of these, the typo is it's not House Bill 2986, it is 2968. Yay, dyslexia. Just with numbers. But so middle housing updates, the permitting for development and SDC guarantees. These are all pieces of going after the development process. Because Washington County is both a land use agency and a housing developer agency, we work really hard to stay on one page. But sometimes when you make updates to things that haven't even been implemented yet, you have a lot of questions. So, and the permitting for development, there's also some questions about the realism behind all of this. It's intended to reduce barriers, but oftentimes ends up just making it harder for our teams to keep up. and can sometimes then lead to fee increases. So I'm just throwing that out there. The SDC guarantee is something that I have been working on as the local government lobbyist for about 10 years. So system development charges is what SDC stands for. It is a charge that we give to developers to pay for impacts to the capacity of our infrastructure for what are called urban services, so water, sewer, stormwater, transportation, parks. We're allowed to charge when you put in new residences, you're gonna have further impacts on the system. This can be very expensive. We usually require them at time of permitting so that we make sure that we get paid. So this is an incentive to local governments to push that payment out to certificate of occupancy, which will help developers not carry those costs, but protects the local government, because our biggest concern is certificate of occupancy is a requirement. However, not in multifamily and not by anyone in this room or represented in this room. Some people let people move in without certificates of occupancy. That's bad. But so they work to not bother paying their SDCs with that. So this just basically creates a fund and establishes a responsibility at the state level to make sure that we are held harmless for those charges if we choose to push them out to the certificate of occupancy place, and then allows the state to go after the developers who fail to pay with interest. And then the final thing, I mentioned this in the governor's recommended budget, is infrastructure production fund. That's that $100 million towards infrastructure. The way we pay for that right now is those system development charges that leads to increases in costs for the development of housing. I think that that's just facts. Don't tell anyone I said that. But what the governor is trying to do is within Business Oregon, which is an agency that does a lot of granting around infrastructure, create a statewide fund that cities and counties can tap into to support infrastructure development that then allows for additional housing to be built. And that is one of the key things that prevents development from moving forward, is that infrastructure capacity. So if a house can't attach to a sewer, it's real unpopular. Or if you can't flush a toilet, people don't want that house. But so I will say within Washington County, the city of Banks was in what's called a moratorium, which is a prevention of any development from happening for a long period of time, because their water infrastructure was so outdated and was not able to support the development that they had already. They did not want to put further development into the city of Banks. It took an extraordinary amount of money to get them to the point where they are now no longer under moratorium, and you're seeing houses being built in Banks. What a lot of our smaller communities face is the inability to raise enough revenue to do infrastructure projects before they get paid back through SDCs. So that's what this is about. It is a priority of the governor. It had its hearing earlier this week, and I'm hopeful that this will finally get over some finish line. So that was a lot of words. I did not talk about all 330 bills or 40 extra homelessness bills. I am also temporarily in this space, so I don't even know if I hit all the high notes, but I talked about our priorities, and that's what matters. So I appreciate your time and your attention and your curiosity. Happy to answer questions, but that is my contact information, and I will send an updated and corrected version of this slide deck later today.
Erin, if this committee wants to come together and say deputize our chair and co-chair to say, we want to write a letter of support, is there a county process we need to go through, or can this advisory body?
This advisory body can work on its own. I am kind of restricted on what I can do for the advisory committees because the board doesn't like me doing stuff that they don't get services for, but I can answer questions at all times. But yeah, if this committee wanted to do that, I can provide information into the program or to program staff to help answer questions.
Does the May 14th number revenue, is it a publicly known number?
Yes, so when that date is there to say this is when it will definitely be available. They do, so the House and Senate Finance and Revenue Committees hold a joint meeting and have a presentation from the state economist.
So.
And that's
public knows
available,
what
yeah.
the number is.
So resource, I'll make sure you have this too, OregonLegislature.gov, very cleverly named. If you click on, there's a little bar on the right side of the page called the Oregon Legislative Information System, or OLIS. You can click on that and you can get into any committee, so you can look at any bill, you can do searches in that bill text. So we have our own internal program, well, a subscription that we use. But OLS is there for the public, and so you can watch things live there, you can watch recordings of things, so this week's revenue forecast presentation is already available if you want to go to the House Finance Committee and watch an economist talk. I think they got rid of Sasquatch on other slides though, so that was sad. But yeah, I appreciate your time, and this is how you find me, or that was how you found me. You can't find me anymore. Right.
That was a lot.
Yeah, and I talk really fast and exuberantly, so.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you for joining
Yes.
us.
Yep.
and Being a wealth of information,
My brain is full.
and we can talk about whether we can organize something, maybe if you want.
Yeah, is that something we need to vote on now to give the chairs the ability to?
Welcome to Jacqueline.
Yeah.
As long as there's a motion and, or, you know,
Great.
a motion and discussion.
Yeah.
Vote.
So do we have a motion to allow the chairs to formulate a letter of support?
So moved.
Second. Are there any discussion items before we vote?
I do want to point out, if there, I know there's a question around like, if there's priority legislation that stood out to the hack members.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be good to discuss. if that's
Yes.
possible.
Good point. Do we want to discuss any of the measures that were brought up today, or any that you perhaps know that ahead of time?
Decided.
Things we might want to focus on, people we might want to focus on.
Erin, can I ask one clarifying question? If you can come back in if you want. Of the legislative actions that you shared with us, these are the ones, just so I make sure I understand, these are the ones that Washington County is advocating for,
The housing preservation package is what we're
what
advocating
you're
for.
advocating for.
On the housing development process and land use, we are working to make it possible if they're going to pass. We're not inherently opposed unless it's gonna just be really expensive. And then the infrastructure and housing, my assumption is we would work in support of that. So none of, the only one, so the middle housing updates, so House Bill 2138 and House Bill 2658, the permitting for development, that still needs some technical work for us to be comfortable as on the land use side. But everything else on this slide is something that we would.
One thing I would
Support.
add, and maybe mention it, is we were working with one of the electeds around the senior housing proposal.
Okay.
I think we're with Carly. It's Carly.
This is Erin's okay face. This is why I have other people.
Just to add to that list, is promoting, getting more housing dedicated to seniors.
And
We're
then the other
fully
thing you
in-
can also advocate on is the budget. You can put in letters of support or letters of asking for more into Oregon Housing and Community Services Department's budget, or other investment funds that you would like to see added to as part of the work that you are doing. So there's many different things. So I can pull that bill number and tell you when it's gonna receive public hearing. It's like 5 days of OHCS presenting, because they're a big agency, and then they take public testimony, and you can add written testimony into the record for 48 hours after that opens. So if you wanted to testify on the housing preservation package or any one of those specific bills within the preservation package, because the hearing is Monday afternoon, you would have until Wednesday at 1 to submit your testimony. So that's a really fast deadline. There's always the House side too. Or the Ways and Means process, depending upon which one.
Is the senior part of the housing preservation or a separate one?
It's separate.
Okay.
So that would be, what, just, to relieve a little bit of the pressure on testifying on preservation, our own chair of our county is gonna be testifying in support of that.
And other alliance folks, like we're in a whole group of people working on that one.
So this one's the hot topic item.
It's the fast topic.
Yeah, yeah, and then we also talked about Metro and federal letters of support as well. But that has a little bit more time. SHS isn't until November.
Ah, we don't know.
We'll
when.
see.
You're just knowing how to hit all my buttons today. So I think that one's gonna be closer to March and SHS, probably closer to March and April when Metro will come back and have that council level conversation. And then federally, whenever, throughout the next 6 months, getting more and more information to our federal delegation about specific projects will be, what they have asked for.
So may I suggest over the next month, let's get something going on some of these key legislative packages, and then let's collate information on impacts of projects on the federal level. And then work through our congressional delegation.
Yeah.
With the letter after that. How about that?
That sounds great. So essentially, we're voting to give Melinda and I the opportunity to write a letter of support for the housing preservation package, plus the proposed budget that we reviewed today, plus the senior housing. Agreed.
So that sounds a little different than the first motion.
It does. We'll have a new motion.
Yeah.
Can we have a new
Get rid
motion?
of the old motion.
Yeah.
And then the one that you just said will be a new motion.
Okay.
It's okay.
So just strike the old motion. Can.
So is there a vote to just withdraw?
Yeah.
That first motion? Is there a motion?
And a second to withdraw the first motion.
Okay, let's get a new one now.
Okay.
Yes.
We have to vote on the withdrawal.
These are all
Yeah.
formal actions.
All right.
Yeah.
So we need a motion to vote on supporting the housing preservation package, the budget and the senior housing.
So move.
Okay, and a second,
Second.
open for discussion. Anyone have any comments?
I
Can we
have,
pick the words you use? Kidding.
Did you want to add something?
I have questions about some legislative actions, not in context of this letter, so I'll hold my question.
So now we go to a vote. And all of those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right,
Any opposed? Okay. So the motion passes.
Great.
I'll let Melinda know we have some work to do when she gets back.
I had a question about the legislative actions as related to, these are all housing. Advocacy for legislative actions as it relates to housing. Is there legislative actions related to houseless and the continuum of services that we are also advocating for?
Yep, so actually the work we're doing with our Solutions Council is
Mhm.
also working on a support letter to in endorsement of the OHCS budget. And then I'm guessing, although don't hold me to this, but I'm guessing in support of the governor's new statewide shelter plan. So we could align with them, or we could have our own letter to you.
I'm fine. Yeah,
But-
I just wanted to make sure I understood that there was also that going on, so thank you for that. Okay.
If we want to also issue a separate one aligning with them, or if we want to just focus on what we're talked about today and allow them to work on that, that's up for discussion.
We join the bandwagon,
Yeah.
like you guys, they do their thing and we
We just.
join in support of.
Actually, I have,
Yes,
here's a
go ahead.
recommendation. How
Go
about we
ahead.
join in on the budget support piece?
Okay.
Because we want, a much of the OHS budget for housing and homelessness.
Okay.
And then I think it does seem a little bit distinct enough for them to do shelter programming and we all packed focus on preservation and senior housing. How does that sound?
Yeah, that's good.
Well, work with Vienna.
Yeah,
It's good work.
thank you.
That's good work.
Yes.
That's great.
Any additional questions or comments? we're still technically on the legislation, new business legislation part of our agenda. So our last agenda item is it's just open to the floor, members share suggestions or possible future discussions that we want to hear during these meetings. Anyone have anything that they want the housing authority to talk to us about, present on?
Guessing those subjects are gonna show up.
Yeah. Yeah, and we did have, we got some feedback prior to Melinda and I taking over as the chair, so we do have some information to go off of. We want to take a look at as well, so.
And it sounds like there's an interest of legislative updates.
Yeah,
frequently.
for sure, yeah. Yeah, personally, knowing what, those deadlines are important to keep an eye on and what we can support and make sure moves on to the next process and doesn't get swept away. It's important. So, thank you for putting all that together. So we're a little early.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So unless there's anything else we want to talk about, we'll do a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Get a second?
Second.
And is that ended or do we have to
Yeah.
vote?
All those in
All right.
Oh.
favor?
Okay, we do have to vote. All those in favor of,
Aye.
any opposed? All right, meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone online. Marion, Dave.